It's interesting to me how people always talk about how many people have died because of communism and never talk about how many people have died because of capitalism. And I really hate to give this person attention because they are a troll on my YouTube who's obsessed with my breasts, but this is a really good point that I've been meaning to talk about, so I'm going to, because it's my page and my boobs. So my partner and I are in a communist country right now, Vietnam. Say hi to Vietnam. Lady Buddha is over there. She is. And we were just in China, and when we were in China, at the Great Wall, we were having a conversation with someone about General Mao. And someone was talking about, it was a local, and they were talking about how a lot of their boomer generation, what we would call boomer generation, really like him because they see that as like when they shifted the People's Republic and not the empire. And later my partner and I were walking to the bus and we were talking about, it's interesting to hear someone talk positively about General Mao, because especially in the West we hear about how many people died if they disagreed with him. And I was like, babe, it's interesting, like we hear, my partner, I forget how many, could name like how many people died because of him. It's like, it's so interesting how we can always count how many people died because of communism but not capitalism, because people do die in capitalism. I mean, even just right now, like how many people do you know? That's part of why people didn't care when Luigi allegedly unaligned the healthcare CEO, because how many people have died from lack of access to healthcare? How many people die from insulin? How many people die from being exposed to the elements because they're unhoused? How many people die in wars overseas that are over oil for rich men and beyond oil that's been going on for forever? How many people died because there weren't labor laws protecting them? That's how the 1960s push for labor laws happened. People were dying in mines and in factories and other places that they didn't give a shit about you. And my partner was like, I think it's harder, one, because when we're in the West, we hear the pro-capitalism propaganda, and there's definitely propaganda in China as well that's pro what they call communism, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's also because it is so baked into the system and comes from so many forces that it is hard to grasp, and you can attribute it to one person. I mean, there's people who believe we have a cure to cancer, but we're not going to know what it is because it's not profitable to get rid of cancer. Like that, we do live in a world, that's part of why people didn't accept the COVID vaccine, because they weren't convinced. Like, we have so much that is for profit, and then people did die over that as well. People died from not getting vaccinated, right? People died during COVID before the vaccines because people were sent to work and not taken care of. So there's just so many things that go into it, and that's part of why, even I'm a class researcher, so I'm a class researcher and a business owner, so people take turns on here accusing me of being a Marxist or a capitalist, and I'm not either. I think you need a blend, and that's not a cop-out. I am, like I said, I'm in Vietnam right now. This is the 14th country I think I've been to, at least. No, 15th. And I have been in places that call themselves communist. I've been in places that call themselves capitalist, and how it is actually played out in the place, what the experience actually is different depending on where you are. Your economic systems are influenced by your culture, and similarly they also influence culture. It's kind of a reciprocal cycle, and I think people blame the economic systems and get hung up on only them because it feels more tangible than something as abstract as culture, but it's incomplete. I made a few videos about when I was in China and how Western influence has changed their customer service. Just a few decades ago, they didn't even have name tags on customer service agents. They had numbers. And that was something that even the capitalist West was really uncomfortable with. And so like when Starbucks, for example, started there, and I know there's a lot of controversy with Starbucks. I also critique them in my book, y'all. They were like, we have to give people names. And a difference with that, somebody commented, wait, communist China had no names? That's not pro-worker? But because there is China ranks higher in the cultural dimension of power distance. The US is only about halfway on power distance. On the scale of 0 to 100, the US is only like 49. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but China is higher. And so is India and a lot of places in Asia. And that's not inherently bad. There's also, with power distance, is how much people who do not have authority are willing to bend to people with authority. And that's also why you have like the hierarchies in families that are more common in Asian and Latin American cultures. Again, there's a lot of nuance and diversity there, but when I'm working with Latin Americans, Asian Americans, that is something in the workplace I usually have to coach them on how do you be assertive in a way that feels authentic to you, because in the US you're expected to be assertive at work, while for more, especially working class, white Americans and black Americans, it's working on not being perceived as too aggressive. That's mostly for white women, not white men, and it's especially higher for black men and women. So those cultural differences are still very much there and influence regardless of the economic system. And I would argue that China has a lot of capitalism in it. They do a lot of innovation, they do a lot of business, and there's also a lot of surveillance and a lot of concentrated power in their government. So, I mean, the local we were talking to called us, she was like, yeah, I mean, the perk of authoritarian leaders is you get things done very quickly. Like the Chinese five-year plan does happen. And we just kind of laughed because, you know, we're there, we're guests. We're not there to like tell them, and I can't talk shit about authoritarian leaders as an American right now. But I really challenge all of us to push back on that there's one type of economic system, or there's two types of economic systems, and regardless of culture, they're always the same. Because a lot of Americans, and here's an example to really help drive it home, a lot of Americans think Europe is socialist, y'all. A lot of Americans think Europe is communist because they have socialized healthcare. Europe is predominantly capitalist. They just have a safety net we don't have in the US in a lot of places. And I learned being in China recently, they call themselves communists, they don't have socialized healthcare. Now, it's generally more affordable and accessible than in the United States, but it still is linked to their jobs, and their employer pays part of the insurance, and they pay part of it as well. So when we cannot look at capitalism in the US as a cookie cutter for how it looks everywhere else, and we can't look at communism in one setting, or even what people claim to be communism in one setting, and think that's cookie cutters for everywhere else, and that there's nothing in between at all, ever. So anyway, thanks for bringing up that question, troll. So my challenge to people as we're all thinking through what would be better, because I don't really have a clear-cut answer for you. I don't pretend to know the ideal economic system, but I think I'm very pro like scientific method. I'm very pro, well, what we have is working, so let's experiment and learn what we can to make it better. So I would challenge all of you that when you hear very triggering words like communism, capitalism, things that get people rivaled up because of generational trauma, because of current trauma, and whatever, that we ask ourselves, why, if you are, whichever part of the world you're in tells you about the death count in another one, and doesn't compare it to what they have in an honest way. Because telling me how many people have died because of communism, I mean, there's a lot to challenge already in that data point of communism, where and in which time period. We need to also, as always, sweep around our own front doors and ask ourselves, what is the quality of life like where I am, where people are denied health care and sent to war? That's not comparing. I think that's what I'm trying to get to, is that when you only say X amount of people have died during communism, not only do you need those other contextual factors I talked about, you need to also ask, and how does that compare to ours, or whatever system you are in? And who benefits from you only knowing one piece of that information? And Vietnam calls itself communist, and the hammer and sickle flag is everywhere here. I mean, like, and even like hung with the Vietnamese flag at the same height. And that to a lot of Americans would be very scary. Like, they have such low crime here. Like, from what I've looked at, pollution is way more prevalent than crime. Well, we were in Hong Kong, which is capitalist. I noticed in the first few days, I said to my partner, I was like, noticed a lot of jobs here that could have been automated or made into a machine that they don't seem to have done that yet with. And he was like, well, you know, remember, they're collectivistic. Even though it's capitalist here, there's still the idea of the collective sharing. And China's way older than a lot of places in the West, even though they've only been, you know, the Republic of China for not so long. But, you know, there's 5,000 years of history there. They know that having a bunch of laid off people isn't a good thing, right? And so some of that is cultural values, and some of that's just being around a long time. So it's just very interesting to see. It's not just the economic structure, y'all. These things go hand in hand. And I realize how much I've traveled is an incredibly privileged position to be in, and that's part of why I share it, because I've never met anyone in my life who could tell me about socialized healthcare in capitalist Europe versus not in supposedly communist China. And that's how I spend my money. You know, this is an account about social class mobility. I don't pretend to not have done well and moved up. That's how I spend my money. You don't see designer handbags or labels on here, but you do see me in apparently 16 different countries. And part of how I give back is by talking about this, especially during these times when we are really realizing systems we have in the US are failing. I fear that if we do not understand the role of culture, we are going to be susceptible to someone who claims to be our socialist savior. And I don't think there's an answer in that. I think it will have to be collective action. And because one person coming in to save you is very individualistic and is also, we're very prone to a narcissist and a psychopath. I don't know what the hell happened to my eyeshadow here, but okay. A lot of people who are pro-communism, who very few have actually lived in it or been to these places. A lot of Americans who are pro-communism, correct myself, I fear are very susceptible to a charismatic, self-proclaimed communist or socialist or whatever, not capitalist leader, because they have not unpacked our cultural ideas about what leadership looks like. That they're so venerating dominance and problematic structures. Because a lot of people will tell you, don't call Stalin a communist, he wasn't a communist. Don't call, all these supposed communist leaders who didn't actually implement what communism is supposed to be. And part of that is because capitalist countries intervene and destabilize. But part of that is because of charisma and narcissism and psychopathy and people who know how to charm and lie, people who are self-interested and power hungry. And there are always those people regardless of economic systems. And so that is why I'm a big believer, and I talk a lot about here, on what healthy leadership looks like, what signs of manipulation look like, reading power dynamics, because wherever you are in the world, and whatever economic system you're in, you will need to know these things to not be vulnerable to a dark triad wannabe dictator.